Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. Dave Frank and I, Eric Kirk, are going to discuss the news of the day. Of course, the big news, is the horrific scene happening in Afghanistan. Although it does look like things are starting to get a bit better. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Joe Biden's decision after the military said you've got to make a decision now because it may take us a few days to load up all the heavy equipment, including helicopters, out of here. So you've got to decide whether the 31st is the deadline. Apparently, after consulting with people, they're confident that they can get all the Americans who want to leave out. Apparently, according to Blinken, there are about estimate of 1,500 Americans left, which is a lot less than the original projection. So they must have gotten a lot of people out. There have been sort of missions of helicopters flying out of the airport, even out of Kabul, to pick up groups of Americans. Meanwhile, on Monday, they flew a total of 21,000 people out. Yesterday was 19,000. They really seem to have it down at this point. A total of 82,000 evacuated, not including what other countries are doing. So pretty remarkable on that basis, but you wouldn't know it from listening to the media. We'll talk about that in the second one, but he is sticking to the August 31 deadline. He's being accused of caving to pressure from the Taliban. Taliban are kind of interesting in their messaging. They're not even saying that they're making threats. They're just saying that ISIS, the what do you call it, state, is Islamic State is making threats, and that they don't think they can keep them at bay. I don't know why they would say that if they didn't feel it was true and if it wasn't being, reinforced. But, we don't know what type of intelligence briefings that Biden is getting. But he decided that he's going to stick to the August 31 deadline. Apparently, as of this morning, there were only 10,000 people left by the airport. I mean, at the rate they're going, they could probably have them all evacuated in a day. But more people are going to come. And apparently, they're using intelligence to get around people around, not just Americans, but allies around the Taliban checkpoints, and they've been getting a lot of people out. But bipartisan people upset with Biden having stuck to the deadline. I'll talk a little bit about the messaging. I think Biden made a mistake in the messaging. I don't know if it's the correct decision or not. I'm just, I'm not an expert on these things, and I don't have the information that he has. But European allies and people on both sides of the aisle, and of course the Beltway media, are saying, you shouldn't be, catering to what the Taliban want, and you should be out of there by the 31st. So far, no Americans have died that we know of. Certainly no American soldiers. And now they're getting, tens of thousands, over 20,000 people out a day. I mean, that's miraculous. And I think Biden last night or yesterday, kind of went on and said, you've been slamming me all week. You got to give us some kudos where we deserve it, because this was a very remarkable effort, probably not done any time in the past. Dave, what do you got to say?
Yeah, so I think we're focusing now kind of on the deadline and the implications of the deadline. And I'm with you that truly massive numbers of people were lifted out. You said 82,000, I think, before we went on air tonight. I saw 88,000. And so those folks are, American and Western country allies, plus a lot of these folks are the SIV, the special visas for Afghan nationals who worked with U.S. Troops or any, to a certain extent, government-funded entities, lesser extent. So I think Secretary of State Blinken hit the same number that you said, that there were 4,500 U.S. citizens evacuated so far. So with about 1,500 Americans left. So what they're talking about is that deadline of August 31st being, by then, we will in theory, be able to get to those people. If they want to leave, they can leave. I say we, I mean, U.S. troops and auxiliary forces and troops and such. And Biden says, look, there's no plan to extend beyond the 31st because right now U.S. troops are holding and securing the airport, managing the airlift mission, which is essential at this point. But next week, the last 2 days of the month, Monday, Tuesday, they're going to focus on getting the U.S. troops out. Mm-hmm. So one last complicating factor, like you said, is there's supposedly a credible threat that ISIS Afghanistan wing has the airport in its sights to cause chaos or mayhem, which would undermine the mutual understanding for orderly withdrawal that our country has with Taliban right now. Also, UK Foreign Office is saying anybody who can leave the airport within 48 hours, find a secure location, get out of the country any way they can in the future. So I think that to hyper focus on the deadline itself, I hate to say it, but so much of our politics is signaling and symbolism. And September 11th is a 20-year anniversary, and it's a week and change into the next month. So August 31st it is. And so that everything is planned around that historic shift. We'll talk more about the why and the how and the messaging and the coverage. But just in terms of the deadline, I think it's happening. And there's one last thing, there's 60,000 people who are sort of in queue to get out. The Taliban has shut that down and said Afghanis are not eligible to travel to the airport with their IDs, biometric scanning checkpoints. They're keeping that population of people from this avenue of leaving the country.
Or they're trying, but there are apparently some of them are slipping around using apparently some tech and intelligence to get around. But we don't know how many people, and obviously it's not going to stop. With August 31st, that's probably not going to be the end of trying to get them out of the country. There are probably going to be a lot of other efforts to do that. But I agree. There's only so much that could have been done. I mean, we talk about, okay, they didn't seem to be ready for this. They got caught flat-footed. But no matter what, when, and how, this was going to be chaotic. And there was going to be a rush to the airport. I'm hearing criticisms that there was another Air Force base that they should have kept and used that as well. I don't know. I don't know why there was the decision to shut that down or how much difference that would have made, if they were organized or prepped to do this. But clearly there is, the messaging probably, I think, was a mistake in terms of domestic politics, whether or not it was a mistake overall. But Biden referenced the Taliban cooperation. He shouldn't have termed it that way, right? Even though apparently the Taliban are cooperating by some accounts, actually fending off potential attacks, possibly, because they don't want to get blamed for it. They're looking for legitimacy, not that they're necessarily, acting on the side of angels, but they definitely do have an interest in not letting such an attack take place. And if they're telling behind the scenes, the president's team that, we can't hold it much longer. And by the way, we do need our airport. We've got to start governing. We do need our economy to pick up. We need our airport back. I mean, this isn't suggesting that the Taliban is legitimate anyway, but you can kind of see it from their perspective. But it's kind of like when Bernie Sanders said, well, Castro's done good things. Well, it's true. Hitler did good things, right? He built the Autobahn. So what? And the Taliban, our cooperating was probably the wrong term to use, because now Republicans and others are going to use that as a wedge against them. I'll let you finish out this segment.
Yeah, I would just say that I stayed hyper focused on the deadline because I talked about how complicated of a country it is, how complicated of a situation is on prior shows. We talked for an hour about it, and I feel like we could have talked for hours more on a different show. But just to keep in mind, these folks are everybody at the top leadership of the Taliban is either on the terrorist watch list or the sanctions list for funding terrorism. They've been in Guantanamo. They've been in military prisons around the world. These are folks that they're not good people. So this was a whatever you want to call it, but like the best that, say, Trump's negotiation could do was an orderly withdrawal. The best that the Biden administration could do is an order withdrawal. And to a certain extent, despite all of the horror that's potentially happening as we speak, it does appear for all on the surface to be an orderly withdrawal, for sure.
Yeah, almost 90,000 people in 10 days. That is pretty amazing in one airport. But all right, related topic is the coverage and the politics of this. And there's a lot going on in terms of the politics. But I remember as I worked on the Jesse Jackson campaign in the 1980s, the media had just decided they were going to beat up on Jesse Jackson the whole time. I don't know why, but they didn't like him, maybe, for whatever reason. And so every story was framed in the negative. And he joked about it. And when I saw him talk in Santa Cruz one time, he said, if I was spotted walking on water, the headlines would say, Jesse can't swim. Well, a lot of that is happening right now. And we talked about how Biden is like kind of demanding a little bit of the kudos because getting 90,000 people out in 10 days is pretty amazing. I mean, that is, of course, it's due to the Air Force and all of that. But Biden relies on everybody for everything, including intelligence to inform him as to what the likelihood is of, the government holding on against the Taliban, right? I mean, it's all based on the information he gets. So it's and he puts together the team that can put this together. This took an incredible organization. It was slow going at first, but they had to set up by international law. They've got to honor the visa system. They can't just throw people in. Besides which, they don't get tagged later if some of them turn out to be terrorists themselves. Apparently, one of them has already been caught up with in France, who got out in the in the airport. And so, they got to be sure they're letting the right people out. And in order to do that, they've just really started flying a lot of people. I'll be curious to see, how the media covers it if there's fewer and fewer people left at the airport. And of course, that's easier to give them food and water and help them out. I would like to know who's being turned away. My feeling is nobody should be turned away. If it turns out they're terrorists, deal with that later. But pretending to be it. But anyways, the media is not giving them any quarter whatsoever. I mean, the Beltway media, anyways. Other media is actually starting to kind of catch up here, and a lot of people who were advocating staying in there, they're actually kind of starting to apologize now. Somebody who advised Obama shortly before said, we thought we could actually win this, right? And has made it. Other people are dead silent. I mean, we need to have a discussion, as we discussed on that other show, about what our role is in the world, and we need to clarify that once and for all. Everybody says we're not going to be into nation building, then you don't do it, right? Bush pledged he would not participate in nation building. 2 years later, he's participating in nation building in two countries. And Al Franken's joke was, I guess he just meant his own country, right? So we can't do that. We just are, we are not in a position to handle this. So is the media covering this with any type of depth? Some of them are. I'm starting to hear stories on NPR where they're talking about people, how this was going to be a mess no matter what for years. Not to take off the mistakes Biden made. Biden, he has to own it. It was an intelligence failure apparently, but he has to own it. He made the decision and didn't have it ready as he should have, possibly, having made the announcement that he was going to honor the withdrawal time that had been negotiated, at that point. It's but the media, they're calling it the Dunkirk, making comparisons to Dunkirk and the rest, and even as their own people are reporting that tens of thousands of people are getting out now, they're still talking about the first few days. Media, once they seem to get on a particular narrative, it's hard to get them off it. And particularly, as we talked about last week, what we'll call the Beltway, the people who are in contact with all of the people in the diplomatic corps and with reporters across the world, and all within the liberal context, the aspirational, what's become known as gunboat liberalism, they are caught up in that framework, and and not wanting to pull out of it and really analyze it. So anyway, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah. So we're talking about media framing, and we're talking about how there is this consensus amongst, people call it the elite media, mainstream media, corporate media, however you want to refer to them. The consensus is in alignment often with the demand for access to the people who they're speaking with, as well as the market, the people who are, putting the eyeballs on the screen so that the corporations who spend on the advertising are matching up the customers with the products. So unfortunately, that's our news is a for-profit entity, and I think that's a like a macro issue about just the general piece of this. So it's not surprising that the media focuses on what you could lazily call a neoconservative consensus at the heart of the foreign policy of both parties. So Biden actually exhibited tremendous leadership, I believe, and it's something that should be applauded for his conviction and clarity. Despite overwhelming polling evidence, the bases of both parties are in favor of bringing the troops home after 20 years. So depending on the source that you look at, 70% of Americans favor bringing combat troops home. 2 out of 3 Americans agree the war was not worth the cost. And Gallup, this is a very reputable source, says only 20% believe that we should stay as long as it takes. So if you're not going to stay as long as it takes, which is what 80% of the people want, there's going to be some day of reckoning that's uncomfortable. So there are humanitarian implications about the way this withdrawal was executed, and it's certainly going to be recorded rightly as a historic tragedy, but that's not the same thing as the way that the media is covering it. And in fact, I think that plays out in the data. So Biden's approval rating was 54% in May, dropped to 52% before the withdrawal. It was 47% yesterday, his lowest level of his presidency. This can be explained by the way the withdrawal was executed. Right. But the president, his fundamental decision to honor Trump's withdrawal agreement is being framed in a highly critical way that implicates him somehow as not listening to or ignoring his advisors. They're calling it disastrous, humiliating fiasco. But I would say that beyond the unfolding tragedy and anticipated horror, we're not seeing how they're framing it. We're not seeing casualties. We're not seeing chaos.
No. I mean, so far, no soldiers killed or even injured. I mean, that's a big deal. And as we get closer to the August 31 deadline, if he gets through it without any American soldiers being killed, if they get out all the Americans who want to leave, apparently there are some Americans who feel like they can still do business there. I mean, there are Americans in there doing business 20 years ago, just as there are in Iran and the rest. There's always people willing to take chances to make some money. But 1,500 seems doable, especially if they're within a helicopter ride of Kabul. So if he gets out, everybody gets out. Granted, there'll be stories about what's happening in Afghanistan, and including to people who, hopefully would have gotten out. It's still, I think that Americans in the long run are going to be glad he stuck to that. So I just, we'll see. I mean, things go up and down based on perceptions. People see, horrific images, and they speak, they say, I'm not happy with that. I don't like the direction we're going in. It's a visceral response. But I whether or not that's permanent, a lot's going to depend on what happens over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and just to remind people, 20 years ago, it was like 95% American approval to go in and get Osama bin Laden and get the Taliban out of there, so that the Afghanistan was not a safe haven for future, extremist attacks on the United States. There was only one dissenting vote in Congress, Barbara Lee. So it was overwhelming support to be there when the case was made, and ... right? But now. It's time to leave. And so the Afghanistan government needed the United States to show public support so that the Taliban's success was not perceived as inevitable. So to a certain extent, that was one of the primary constituents. 100 to 200 billion a year over a 20-year period. That's an awful lot of money. So sink or swim was likely going to be tragic under any contingency. I would just reiterate, wall-to-wall media coverage that this was the greatest defeat or the worst mistake in military history seems agenda-driven at best.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll certainly be discussing this next week. Our show will be a day after the deadline, and we'll see what will have happened by that time. But if it continues to go this way, I don't think Biden's going to suffer a long-term political consequences for it. Might even favor him, but we'll see.
I think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
All right. Well, politics don't stop. They continue domestically, and the infrastructure bill has come up. Of course, we've talked about how there was the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but a lot of moderates saying take the win, and let's just vote for this, and we'll deal with the other later. Progressives not trusting the moderates to go along with the 3.5 trillion one, and so I'm not sure exactly what happened to maneuver it, but apparently Nancy Pelosi pulled something together to get a unified all Democrats to vote to support this bill. I guess it goes back to the Senate on the on the reconciliation bill, as they're calling it, and I'm not even sure exactly what's in it. I haven't had a chance to really look at it. I'm not sure if it's all available to the public even, but something has happened over the past couple of days where apparently the moderate opposition just kind of evaporated, almost, if you want to make a comparison, like the Afghan government. I don't know, but it. But they were there. So when it goes back to the Senate, what's going to happen with the moderates up there with Manchin and Sinema? Dave?
So the latest development, as you said, this reconciliation bill moved on to the next step. It's on the schedule for September 27th, I believe. So this procedural rule was approved 220 to 212. And this was despite that group of 9 moderates attempting to de-link the bipartisan infrastructure bill from the budget reconciliation bill, in part led by Congressman Gottheimer from New Jersey. So their position was that this should be passed as soon as possible. And behind that was the Problem Solvers Coalition, Chamber of Commerce, a lot of the moderate corporate funders saying let's try to weaken the big 3.5 trillion bill by focusing on the one that we could all agree on and collaborate in a bipartisan way with the Republicans and get agreement. So that was kind of the impetus behind that rogue move by this group. They delayed passage yesterday. It took a while, but ultimately it was evidence that the Democratic leadership could accurately assess the raw vote count and effectively communicate with their overall caucus the consequences of failing to support President Biden and, by extension, the Speaker of the House and Pelosi and also Senator Schumer, their commitment to the progressive wing. So part of when we say the progressive wing, we're saying, this was more than just a half dozen members of the squad. 30 years ago, when the progressive wing was founded, it was only 6 members, but now they have almost 100 members, so nearly half of the entire caucus. So
the largest caucus in Congress.
Yeah, exactly. So there wasn't a way for the 9 people, even with some Republican support, to go to overwhelm the progressive caucus. And so I think Nancy Pelosi effectively got those folks in the room and explained the numbers. And I'll get into that a little bit more with you, just how that power was sort of exhibited. But basically, that's the deal, is that it just wasn't possible. So it was, something or nothing was explained.
Well, and I think, what they had hoped was to keep them separate so that the bipartisan bill passes, and then Manchin and Sinema can get what they want, start paring it down, get rid of some of the green tech stuff, alternatives to coal, whatever. But, now they're in the tough position that if they take too hardline a stand on that, they jeopardize the bipartisan bill, which they've been claiming as kind of their win, especially Sinema. So, that they managed to get this done with the Republicans. So if it's both of them at once, they're not going to have as much time to really sit and be obstructionists, and they take the risk of derailing their own triumph. So that, and this is exactly what they didn't want. This is exactly what Pelosi has said from the beginning, how it was going to be done. She sounds like Willie Brown did something similar in the 1990s. I don't have time to go into it, but there is a way of really playing hardball politics without playing hardball politics, and it sounds like that's what she did.
Yeah. So obviously, the plan from 3 months ago, whether it was through Progressive Caucus Chair Jayapal or the president or whoever explicitly stated these things are going to run in tandem together to keep the Democratic caucus together. So they didn't. The Representative Josh Gottheimer and the problem solvers, what did they really accomplish in this grandstanding? The outcome that they got, the benefit, the thing that they're claiming right now publicly as a success is that they were told the date on the calendar to expect a vote, September 27th. And they got inserted into the language, shall consider, which was designed to build confidence because in Washington speak, that means must. So it means must vote on that day. So suddenly they're like, great, we're going to get this day. This is our day. We win. But they were like, I think it was I hate to use this simplicity, but it was black and white because the progressives had the ability to make it so that they didn't get the bipartisan bill passed, and the moderates did not have the ability technically to make it so that the budget reconciliation bill did get passed. So it was really about saying, look, we are a team. We're bringing this together. We want to support the president. He's having a struggle with COVID. He's having a struggle with Afghanistan. He's having a struggle. You name the thing that he's struggling with. But this is our domestic policy. This is our one big thing that we can bring together. So the moderates have never, historically, the last, 20 years, moderates have never been able to block leadership. So Pelosi was digging into a playbook that is well tread. Party leadership controls financial support in the upcoming 2022 election cycle, and every House member is up for re-election every 2 years. So there was no maneuvering or posturing that could have changed this calculus. So of course these guys are saving face and publicly saying they got a victory, and so are their allies. U.S. Chambers out there tweeting, and No Labels is out there tweeting how successful they were. But in fact, the party stuck together behind the president, which was a success for not this group of 9.
And even as Biden is taking it in the media for, the first topic, Afghanistan, it may be, I wonder if that almost put pressure on moderates to especially do it. If everything had been going well for Biden, maybe they'd be willing to take a few more chances. But they know that Biden is being slammed by the Republicans and by the media. So maybe that was part of the impetus. Do you really want to alienate Biden right now with this? We need to get this moving, and Pelosi's probably figuring if they want to take the date certain wording as a win, sure, let them have it. Fine.
Yeah. I mean, there's not much more I have to say about this other than that. Like, this is how the sausage gets made, and the coverage in the media has to focus on the folks that go out and speak to the cameras and say, we're not going to take this and we're going to do that. And then in fact, a lot of these Congress people, a lot of these representatives, they are out there because they raise money, and the people who give them money, they're going to carry water, or at least publicly until they can't. So it's one of those things where it's like, yes, we all want shovels in the ground, and we know that the conservative or moderate talking points are that, look, $1 trillion is so much money, $3.5 trillion is so much money. But in fact, this is a 10-year bill. And so we're talking, even if they get everything, which they're totally not, because between the parliamentarians and the line items and the cutting and the this qualifies and that doesn't qualify, that number is going to get cut down pragmatically anyway. So then even at that top line number of 3.5 trillion, we're talking 350 billion a year, which is less than half the defense budget. So in reality, it's not like the people that say it's the end of the world. This is debt. We're going to drown in debt. These people are crazy. It's the end of that whole thing about undermine the funding sources. Right. It's not being paid for. You get the idea. Right. It's just not as revolutionary as the critics are claiming in terms of debt, but it's also not as revolutionary in terms of what it's going to accomplish, but it's close. It's a huge investment in human infrastructure, which we can talk about another show.
And all that paring down, that'll allow Manchin and Sinema to say, "See, I got it knocked down."
Exactly.
Do it. They're boxed in, but they'll have the ability to save face and say, "I got this out of it," even though that probably would have happened anyway.
Totally, I'm with you.
Yeah. All right. Okay, I think we've exhausted that topic for now. Obviously, more to come. Certainly in September. Be very interesting to see what happens. But you can also tell, by the way, that some of the Republican leadership is really annoyed. So that gives you the rest, and they're not happy. Anyways, that takes us to the next topic.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
All right, that brings us to the next segment. We are going to go back to the Delta variant, the politics of the Delta variant. FDA has officially approved Pfizer for the vaccination. That they're saying that is going to lead to more mandates, just as opposition to mandates is heating up all around the country. We had a local one this last Sunday with actually kind of a controversial local liberal figure showing up to it. A lot of heat around the use of the comparisons to the Holocaust and the rest happening. A little bit of violence happening down in Los Angeles at this demonstration, but the opposition is somewhat firm. But vaccinations are starting to happen even in those red states at this point. Maybe we'll be able to make some kind of breakthrough. But, as I understand it, we just reported 3 deaths here in Humboldt County alone, and which I don't know if that's a daily record for us. I'm not sure, but it's a lot that we've had in a long time. So at any rate, we've got this happening. We've got everything going around the mandates, the complaints about them, but it looks like more are going to happen. There's protests all over the place, including Europe. What does the FDA approval of Pfizer, what does that even mean? How come we've been able to use it if the FDA hadn't approved it? And what does that now mean in terms of the reality on the ground?
Yeah, so the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the commissioner, Woodcock, came out and said, we recognize that for some, FDA approval of a vaccine may now instill additional confidence to get vaccinated. It also went on to say that it confers that it meets high standards for safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing quality. What does that even mean? Like you said, it means that they've applied for a BLA, a biologics license application, and then it's been approved. So that means like clinical data, manufacturing process, quality testing, site inspection. And this data set was for people 16 and older, just for context for everybody out there. And also Moderna submitted today their BLA for people 18 and over. So who knows how fast this process takes.
And it's a very very extensive process involving thousands of people, a bunch of groups, different groups. It's really not something that just gets rubber stamped. This is a major process. That's why it takes so long. But we were doing it without official FDA approval under emergency guidelines. But this is a big deal, and maybe more people will have confidence in it. Who knows?
I think this isn't, I'm not quoting experts here. This is just my interpretation of what I've read over the last 18 months or whatever, or 10. I mean, it's a blur at this point, but like the emergency approval was in part because they did have extensive clinical data and this new technology, this mRNA technology. And so I'm not talking about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine right now. I'm talking about, so you actually, let's talk about Johnson & Johnson. That one's easier to approve on an emergency basis because it uses existing vaccine technology.
Typical vaccine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that one's even easier to do on an emergency basis. But the mRNA was something that decades of research has been in, and they people make fun of all these experiments that have happened around the world, and do we trust them? Do we not trust them? In fact, it's been safe. It's been proven to be safe. That's why they were so confident to roll it out. I believe that's why they were so confident to roll it out on an emergency basis.
But you'd think also, I mean, you've got the official test, but you've got the practical test of the fact that, millions of people have been taking it now for months, and, the first ones in the trials last summer, and we're not seeing, a whole lot of bad impacts. Of course, the argument is, well, maybe it'll take 2 years or 3 years before you get, turned into a zombie or whatever. I'm not quite sure exactly, what they're expecting to happen, but millions and millions and millions of people have been taking it, and with no more than the adverse effects at rates that you'd find with any typical medicine. There's always going to be somebody who's allergic. There's always going to be somebody who it doesn't work out for. But the vast majority, it's not generating any significant side effects other than just the fatigue of that happens after the second one for some people, because your immune system kicks in, usually only lasts a day or two, and a few other things that are pretty typical, but it doesn't seem to be having any adverse effects. But again, they're saying, well, maybe it just hasn't been long enough. Well, it's been a year. And in fact, they're talking about now how we might need boosters at a certain point. They're dealing with that. So if it's not going to happen while the vaccine is still effective at what it's doing, what are the chances that it's going to have some longer term effect? Who knows? And we don't know. It is true, but everything is experimental at the beginning. But that was a pretty grand experiment. Millions of people across the planet taking these vaccines.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much here. We'll probably have to revisit this because there's so many angles to go, so many different ways to go. But because we're talking safety, and this is a great avenue for our conversation here. Currently, only 52% of Americans are fully vaccinated. So there's a real need to address this safety issue and deconstruct it and try to get the word out. 4.7 billion doses have been administered in 183 countries. And there have been no flags about safety and efficacy at all. That's maybe we're changing the wheels on the bus as we're going down the road, as the metaphor goes, simile, whatever. But the truth is that there have not been red flags yet around the world. There's a global phenomena of widespread protest. In France, it's both the left and the right. In Australia, they had their turn. Like you said, down in LA, someone was just stabbed when pro and anti-vax protesters happened to occupy the same street at the same time. So people are really emotional about this. It's fueled by fear. It's fear about safety, deemed too experimental. And one last thing, a general increase in the number of businesses that are making it a condition of employment. So that's really, people are feeling like, oh, now you're bringing it to me. Now you're affecting my ability to have a job and earn income. Also, vaccine passports are out there. People are fearful of that, meaning like your access to bars, restaurants, malls, mass transportation, crossing borders. It just seems like, is this something we want our government to be involved in? So people are hesitant and fearful.
Yeah, but a lot of it's not even government. A lot of it's businesses that don't want to kill their customers. I mean, it's the mandate. There is no, and we got to get this through. There's a lot of misinformation. There's no government mandate that's going to tell each individual you have to get that vaccine. It's just like anything else. I mean, there's no law that says. Well, there actually are laws that say I have to wear pants, but but a business can tell me, no, you cannot come into my business if you don't wear pants. And that is their right, and and that does affect my freedom. I can't just wander around without pants and do whatever I want. It's just the way it is. But there's also so much misinformation going out. I mean, one of the signs I saw at the rally on Sunday is, there have been 12,000 deaths due to vaccines. And first of all, it's not that. It's a little over 6,000 people who have died who have been vaccinated. But only 3 of them died of the blood clots, right? That's people who were vaccinated and have died from any causes. Now, there's only 3 of them that have been tied to the blood clots associated with the Johnson & Johnson one. I'm not even sure anybody's been declared dead from anything, any complications from Pfizer or Moderna. A couple of incidents where you can say, well, it failed to kick in time and they died, anyway, that type of thing. But the misinformation out there, they don't understand what they're looking at, and so they make something out of it. 6,000 people died who took vaccines. Yeah, that sounds really bad until you look at it.
And we are talking about the relative risk, because we know that 600,000 people, are dead. So because of the virus, right? I
think we're up way above that now. I think we're considerably above that.
Yeah. So it's a huge difference. But I just want to say for a little background real quick, interesting bit of American history. I don't know if you heard this, but at the time of the Revolutionary War, after the Battle of Princeton, at that point, about 90% of U.S. casualties were due to disease, mostly smallpox. George Washington ordered his army to begin inoculating all troops who traveled through Philadelphia, and this was then implemented more broadly through the creation of 11 field hospitals. And his famous quote is, "Necessity not only authorizes, but seems to require the measure. For should the disorder infect the army, we should have more to dread from it than from the sword of the enemy." Once those treatments were administered, not a single soldier was lost to smallpox, literally making this an essential element of the American campaign. Ever since then, there's been anti-vaccination campaigns. So it's always come part and parcel where we have to balance the risk and reward, and leadership is explaining to people what's necessary and why.
All right. Well, that brings us to our next topic. All right. We haven't discussed this in a while, I think, but January 6th continues to pop up in the news, and there have been several stories associated with it. I didn't get a chance to actually read the story, just skim it, but it's January 6th related. But Sidney Powell, the woman known as the Kraken, who went off and really started to make some wild claims about the election, she faced a judge in Detroit today, and the judge is pretty much calling for her disbarment based upon misrepresentations that she's made in court and outside of the court. Obviously, whatever is decided there, she's going to fight it. But it really is coming. We've got the Maricopa thing, which we're waiting for this report. It's been delayed because somebody got COVID. I mean, there's a bunch of, you can't make this stuff up, but there's a lot of stuff going on there. Everybody's waiting for that. But January 6th, of course, was the consequences of the big lie, as some of the media refers to it. And we've had a couple of developments over the past week. For one thing, today, it turns out the January 6th committee, the House committee, is requesting Trump administration records. We're not quite sure how, but it's extensive documents that they're requesting. And I'm not sure. Everybody's speculating as to why and why now and what is it that they found. But trying to throw cold water on it, I think it was the Washington Post, I'm not sure, one of the papers had 4 people from the FBI leaking that the report's going to show that there wasn't a coordinated effort to try to get in there, that there was like the Proud Boys had a little bit of organization, but mostly it was just a random thing that tried to happen. But we know that there have been divisions in the FBI. One of the reasons that the whole thing happened in 2016, that I'm forgetting his name now, but the reason he released that report 2 weeks before the election was because he was afraid. Thank you, Comey was afraid of the that they were going to leak it anyway, and he wanted it to be in an orderly thing. So there's definitely FBI, different political factions within there. Did those four have an agenda to try to, ahead of the report of the FBI, release of the FBI report, to try to downplay it, say that there wasn't? We'll find out. But for whatever reason, I believe that the House committee received that report, and they're very specific about the documents that they're asking for, and it's extensive. Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the news that came out today, the latest development. A lot of the attribution goes to Democratic Representative Benny Thompson, the chairman of the Select Committee. And so his quote is, the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol is examining the facts, circumstances, and causes of the attack. Our Constitution provides for a peaceful transfer of power, and this investigation seeks to evaluate threats to that process, identify lessons learned, recommend laws, policies, procedures, rules, or regulations necessary to protect the Republic of the future. So what are they doing about it? They've sent notices to various telecommunications and social media companies requesting that they preserve phone records and communications records, including members of Congress like House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and GOP Rep Jim Jordan, who both have already acknowledged speaking to Trump on January 6th.
Yes.
And then they have 2 weeks. They also sent these requests to government agencies, the Justice Department, Defense Department, Interior, as well as National Archives and Records Administration. So the governmental agencies have 2 weeks to comply on a voluntary basis, and then after that, subpoenas go out to everybody. So they're casting a pretty wide net at this point, which means that and there's been a leak of the planning document, which basically says they've signed off on a broad investigation that will serve as the guide for the whole plan going forward. They're planning to contact hundreds of people. Like, this is going to be a thing for years.
Yeah, and they're going after the phone records of some of the Congress people too. I mean, this is going to be interesting. We'll see what happens with it, but they definitely are trying to send a message here. I think that by asking for all that, they may be trying to counter what the 4 FBI people leaked. I don't know, or maybe this was just the natural course of the investigation. We won't know for a long time. Obviously, they got to get the records. There'll probably be some fight to do that. Trump may actually file a lawsuit to try to intervene to force Biden to resist it. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And just as the politics are getting strange, some of the judges, for instance, have been upset with the prosecution in some of these cases of the people who were there on January 6th being prosecuted, saying, this cost us, hundreds of millions of dollars. Why are you going easy on these people? And one judge actually imposed a sentence longer than had been recommended for the Proud Boy leader, forgetting his name, the one, and this was actually for not a January 6th event, but for him burning the BLM flag that was on the church, and for bringing in high-powered magazines a couple of days before the 6th, even though he wasn't directly involved. And judge just said, that's too late. So the judges are starting to, demand that the prosecutors, and maybe the prosecutors just want to get through these cases. But there's a lot happening as to them. Of course, these people, some of them did just go with the crowd, and maybe they just want to get rid of that. But this guy obviously didn't go with the crowd. He was an instigator. The politics are heating up. I've noticed some very that the GOP is really kind of quiet right now.
Yeah.
They haven't formulated a response. They haven't come out to say, "Oh, well, the FBI shows that's that this is trivial. But they've all learned from Barr's assessment of what the Mueller report was going to say turned out to be a lot different. But Barr got out in front of it, and that was the media coverage that it was innocuous. Turned out not to be quite as innocuous, but the story never caught up with it. Maybe that's what the 4 FBI people were hoping, but this just expands the story, and this has everybody's attention.
Yeah, expanded story, everybody's attention. I'm going to cue on that because that's very telling. So far, almost everything's happened behind closed doors on purpose because of obvious implications if people can get ahead of the story or they know what to expect. But people put this in perspective and said, like, well, when Congress investigated the Benghazi attacks, that special select committee 2012 terrorist attack spent $7 million over 2 years. So it was a 2-year conversation about a very finite issue. And so this is in effect has unlimited funding. And so Liz Cheney, I think, is a good sort of barometer, litmus test of where their thinking is. And she said that they plan to compile every piece of information that matters. And then to get a little bit more clarity, she specifically said, we're going to document a detailed understanding, quote, of Trump and his allies that day leading up to the attack. So there, it's not just the 800 people who walked through the door. There was 200, maybe 400, maybe 600 people who did something that's technically criminal. It's not just that. Me and you talked about it before. Leading, back in January, it's some of the stuff we haven't covered, so I don't recall names and articles and sources. But there are all sorts of documented connections between Republican funders, Republican political office holders, and communications about let's get there and let's party and let's support the president. In fact, if you watch the documentary series about QAnon, the people who probably were behind it all were at the event. So this net, this wide cast net, could in theory bring in all sorts of things. So it makes sense that Republicans are going to lay low or their careers are in jeopardy.
Well, and I come back to this. I said this before. I think that most of the Republicans actually resent that Trump pushed them into not legitimizing, not making it a bipartisan thing, because not only can they not block these subpoenas and everything like they could have been able to if it was a joint one, but they can't even leak stuff because the Republicans in there want this to happen, right? So they can't even leak stories to try to, minimize it ahead of time. They've got no power to do that. And I know, I just am certain that right now in their heads and in their private meetings, they're saying that damn Trump. Because he just absolutely didn't want them to cooperate. He's got his own agenda. And unfortunately, with the way the party is structured right now, his agenda is their agenda. They don't have their own, except on policy. Okay, this is the part of the show where we provide our predictions. Dave, what do you got?
This will be my shortest prediction. I think our producer will be happy. So my prediction is that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, or some variation of its primary provisions, will become law. This means that the principle of strengthening voting rights will be raised to the paramount level of consideration it deserves. The case will be made to carve out an exception to the filibuster rules, and the Senate will be able to pass the bill along party lines.
All right. I've got two, and I'll try to be quick. One of them is we're over the next few weeks, because of all the deadlines for redistricting and the rest, we're going to get a lot of information about new maps across the country with the redistricting. But as we discussed on a show several weeks ago, the population shifts are actually beneficial to the Democrats. People are moving out of the rural red areas and into suburbs and cities, and it's going to be very hard for Republicans to do this. So my prediction is that I'm sure there'll be it'll be back and forth depending on which state, but it is not going to be all that detrimental to the Democrats. And Kinzinger is in trouble, unfortunately, because he's got that loop around Chicago that he's got. But Democrats want to maximize their chances of getting Congress people, and unfortunately, that means that one's going to have to go. He may switch parties. Real quickly on the recall, as of yesterday, 5% of the vote was in, ballots were in, over 600,000 of them Democrats, 230,000 Republicans, and 230,000 independents. I don't think that bodes well for the recall itself. I think one of the things that's probably going to save Newsom in this is the fact that a ballot is sent to everybody. If they had to actually get people out to the polls, there would be a lot more trouble. But I think that that's a bad indication for the recall. All right, well, that is the show for this week. We will be back next week, obviously talking about the passing of the August 31 deadline. Who knows what's going to come up? Until then, keep thinking.